We need, if you like, to be active on a wide range of fronts. For example, you mentioned Ayaan Hirsi Ali. She's a living proof that it is completely dishonest and utterly misleading to conflate religion and race. That's a really important point. You can't say, well, it's racist to go after people who rape and destroy the lives of young white girls because they are actually, if you like, in fact, Muslim. There's a difference between belief and race. To conflate the two is part of the intellectual debate that we have to, I think, be very active in. But then you come to the reality we've got to use to the best of our ability what our forefathers have given us, the democratic process, to try and ensure that the law, for example, is upheld, that justice is pursued.
Yeah, basically democracy only really works in a high-trust, homogenous, culturally coherent civilization. If you demographically gerrymander a democracy because one side, mainly the native populations of the Anglosphere, vote along the lines of issues and policies and preoccupy themselves usually with things like economics, whereas the other side preoccupy themselves much more saliently with questions of collective identity, with race, with religion, with ethnic solidarity, and vote along the lines of redistributing resources via the state to themselves as a client group, then what you get is democracy building a critical mass of that second group until they become the majority and the issues-based individualistic native population become the minority. And in that scenario, I don't think that we would get the same protections as a minority as our supposedly liberal democratic governments are obsessed with affording to the various hostile client groups that have been brought into our country. And so you cannot have a democracy that is also culture blind and treats people like blank slates, because it was Wolfgang Buckenfurter, who was a jurist after the Second World War who was involved in reconfiguring Germany's constitution for obvious reasons. And he said the problem with liberal democracy is that it slowly undermines the givens upon which it rests because it refuses to draw distinctions between people, culture, the nations that are brought into its borders, and instead enfranchise everyone in egalitarian fashion, even though they don't interact with democracy in the same way. And so the worrying feature of British life is that currently there are very few politicians who are brave enough to stand up and observe this fact and say there are certain cultures and religions which are incompatible with being British. Despite, in the last YouGov polling that found this out, 53% of people believe that being Muslim is incompatible with British values, mainly because there's never been a strong presence of Islam in Britain that contributed to the creation of Britain's peace and prosperity before recent decades, and it's already causing culture clashes. But when politicians put their head above a parapet and even in a mild fashion say these obvious truths like Katie Lamb or Robert Jenrick or Nick Timothy or Rupert Lowe, they're either banished from their party, piled on by the press, or denounced by their party leadership, despite this being obviously popular with the public. In terms of the conflation of religion and race, again, I think this is something that's very particular to the Anglosphere, and I think that we get it right, but we also have to have a theory of mind for how the rest of the world thinks of themselves. So I can very easily get along with Christians of other nationality and ethnic backgrounds. I can very easily get along on a civic way with highly educated Hindus or Sikhs who have been, very generous in this country in terms of their charitable giving. However, lots of other religions and faiths are much more tribal. This is why we saw in 2022 when a cricket match broke out between India and Pakistan, riots that shut down the city of Leicester for weeks. This is why we see Sikhs in Canada and even the UK now protesting on the streets for Khalistani independence, an entire Sikh nation, and lobbying the country that they themselves are now citizens of, whether it be Britain or Canada, for the interests of Indian politics. And this is why we see, in the worst example of this, in the Pakistani rape gangs that I've been covering for a while, this concept of asabaya. It's found in the Quran and Hadith, and it basically means extending loyalty only so far as what benefits you, your family, your broader clan network, your ethnicity, and your ummah. Alfred Guillaume, who is a Arabist, who wrote a book just called Islam. It's a very good little tome for people to get a primer on Islam. He had a quote where he said that the Arab respects the laws of the land only insofar as it doesn't come between him and his own, as in only insofar as it doesn't interrupt that which interests his family. Whereas, of course, Christianity has the respect for the law of the land and then also the observance of your private faith, the render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, while also never knowing the hour or the day that you will be judged. There's a respect for civic authority and there's a respect for your religion. There is no separation of mosque and state. And we have to understand that there's also very little separation between Islam and ethnicity.